The shed looked ordinary. That was the point. Stacked firewood along the walls. A simple sloped roof. Snow gathering along the edges like it did on every other structure in the valley. Nothing about it stood out. Nothing about it suggested anything more. That's why they didn't notice. Not at first. My name is Mara Ellison. And by the time they understood what I had built, Winter had already decided who was prepared and who wasn't. The idea didn't come from fear. Not exactly. It came from watching. From paying attention to the way cold actually worked. Most people think cold comes from outside. That it pushes in. Forces its way through walls, doors, windows. But that's not how it feels when you sit inside a cabin long enough. The truth is quieter than that. Cold doesn't rush in. Heat leaves. And once it's gone, cold is what's left. That's what I saw. Year after year. Fires burned harder. Wood disappeared faster. And still, the warmth never lasted. So I stopped thinking about how to make more heat. And started thinking about how to keep it. The answer wasn't in the fire. It was in the ground. The earth doesn't change temperature the way air does. It holds steady, slow, consistent, even when everything above it freezes. I had felt it before, accidentally, while digging out an old post near the shed, just a few feet down. The soil was different. Not warm, but not frozen either. Stable. That stayed with me. Longer than it should have. Long enough to become something else. A plan. I started digging in early autumn, before the frost set in, before anyone was paying attention. Because if they had asked what I was doing, I wouldn't have had a simple answer. And complicated answers. Invite questions. The spot mattered. It had to be beneath the shed, not beside it, not behind it, under. Because the shed already did something useful. It blocked wind. It carried weight. And most importantly, it looked normal. That was what kept people from asking. I cleared the woodpile first. Quietly. Stacked it nearby. Then I started digging. Straight down. The soil was soft at first. Then heavier, packed, holding moisture, each layer different, each one telling me something about how the ground behaved. I went deeper than I planned, because once I felt the change, I knew where I needed to be, about 4 feet down. The cold stopped getting stronger. It didn't reverse, but it stabilized. That was enough. I widened the space, carefully, not too large, because large spaces are harder to control, harder to heat, harder to maintain. I shaped it into a chamber. Low ceiling, curved edges, no sharp corners. Because air settles differently in rounded spaces. Moves less, stays longer. That mattered. The walls came next. I reinforced them with wood. Not thick beams, just enough to hold shape. Then packed earth behind them again. Layered, compressed, creating a barrier that wouldn't shift, wouldn't collapse, wouldn't leak air. The entrance was the hardest part. It couldn't be obvious, couldn't be exposed. So I built it into the side, hidden behind the stacked firewood. A narrow opening, just wide enough to crawl through, just deep enough that it disappeared once the wood was back in place. That was the first layer. The second was control, because a hole in the ground isn't shelter. Not by itself. It needs airflow, but not too much. It needs warmth, but not open flame in a confined space. So I built a small ventilation shaft, narrow, angled, hidden behind the back of the shed. It allowed air to move, slowly, without creating a draft. That was the balance. The difference between suffocation and losing heat. Then came the floor. I didn't leave it bare. Packed earth pulls heat away, just like stone. So I layered it. Dry grass, then boards, then blankets, creating separation. Because insulation isn't just in walls. It's everywhere. By the time I finished, it didn't look like much. From the outside, nothing had changed. The woodpile went back. The shed stood the same. And underneath, a space existed that no one knew about. That was how I wanted it. Not secret out of fear, but out of practicality. Because people don't trust what they don't understand. And I didn't have time to convince them. Winter arrived slowly. At first. Then all at once. The first snow didn't last. The second did. The third didn't leave. By mid-season, the valley had settled into that quiet rhythm of survival. Smoke in the mornings. Wood chopping in the afternoons. Fires burning longer each day. People preparing, but not changing. They were still doing what they always did. Burn more. Stack more. Feed the fire. Because that's what they knew. And for a while, it worked. Until the week, everything shifted. It started with the wind. A low, constant pressure that didn't stop. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually, but sharply. The kind of cold that makes wood crack. That makes breath feel heavy. That pulls heat from everything faster than you can replace it. The coldest week. No one called it that at first. But everyone felt it. Fires burned all day, all night. Wood piles shrank faster than expected. Too fast. That was when they started noticing things. Not about me, but about difference. "How are you still using so little wood?" Turner asked one morning. He stood near the shed, looking at the stacked logs. Still high, still mostly untouched. "I don't burn as much," I said. "That's not possible. It is if you don't lose what you make." He frowned. Because he didn't understand yet. Not fully. His fire had been going since before sunrise. I could see it in the smoke. Thick, uneven. That meant constant feeding. Constant loss. "You'll run out," he said. "Not this week." That was when he paused. Because he heard something in my voice. Not confidence. Not guesswork. Certainty. "Why not?" he asked. I glanced at the shed. At the woodpile covering what he couldn't see. "Because I'm not relying on the fire the same way you are." He followed my gaze. But saw nothing. Just wood. Just structure. Just normal. That was the point. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said. "You should," I replied. Because by tomorrow, the cold would be worse. And by then, he'd be ready to listen. That night, the temperature dropped again, lower than before. The kind of cold that doesn't just press against walls. It moves through them. And that was when my plan was finally tested. Not in theory, not in preparation, but in reality. I stepped into the shed, moved the wood aside, revealed the opening, and climbed down. Into the space no one believed was worth building. The air inside was different. Not warm, but stable. Still, unaffected by the sharpness above. I closed the entrance behind me, sealed it, and sat down, waiting, listening, feeling the difference. Above me, the cold raged. But down here, it couldn't reach the same way. And for the first time since winter began, I wasn't fighting it. I was working around it. That was the difference. And by morning, when the cold reached its worst, that difference was going to become impossible for anyone to ignore. The cold didn't feel the same underground. That was the first thing I noticed. Not warmer, not in the way a fire makes a room warm, but steady, like the air had decided not to change. Above ground, the cold sharpened everything. Edges, breath, thoughts. It moved through spaces, through walls, through anything that didn't hold against it. Down here, it stopped moving. That was the difference. I sat still for a long time that first night. Not sleeping, not doing anything, just feeling the air. Because this was the test. Not whether it worked in theory, but whether it held when everything else failed. I had brought a small lantern, kept it low, controlled. Not for heat, just for light. Because heat wasn't something I needed to create down here. Only something I needed to keep. That was what I had built. Not a place to generate warmth, but a place where warmth didn't disappear. My body heat stayed. Didn't bleed away into the air. Didn't vanish into the walls. It remained. Subtle, but real. And that was enough. Hours passed. The kind of hours that feel longer when you're waiting for something to go wrong. But nothing did. The air stayed still. The temperature stayed consistent. And the cold above stayed above. By morning, I knew. This wasn't just shelter. It was better than anything built on the surface. I climbed out slowly, pushed aside the wood, stepped into the shed, and the difference hit immediately. The air above ground felt sharper, colder, like it had edges again. I stepped outside. The valley looked frozen in place. No movement, no sound except the faint crack of distant wood. That was when I saw the smoke. Thinner, lower, struggling. That wasn't normal. Smoke should rise. But in cold like this, it clings, falls, because the air is too heavy to let it escape. That meant something else. They were burning more wood than usual, trying to force heat into a space that couldn't hold it. And it wasn't working. Turner came before noon. He didn't wait this time. Didn't stand outside and call. He walked straight into the shed, looked at the woodpile, then at me. "You weren't burning last night," he said. "No, I didn't see smoke. I didn't need a fire." That stopped him, because that didn't make sense. Not in the way he understood things. "That's not possible," he said again. "It is if you're not losing heat." He stepped closer, looked at the woodpile again, then back at me. "You're hiding something." "Yes." I didn't deny it. There was no reason to anymore. "Where?" he asked. I didn't answer with words. I moved, pulled the stacked wood aside, slowly, deliberately, revealed the opening. He stared at it. At first, he didn't understand what he was looking at. Just a gap, a dark space beneath the shed. Then realization hit. You dug this? He asked. Yes. When? Before the frost. He crouched, looked closer, still not fully believing. Then he lowered himself down, carefully, disappeared into the chamber. I waited. Because this was always the same. The moment when explanation stopped matching, and experience took over. A few seconds passed, then longer. Then I heard it. Not a word, just a shift in breathing. A pause. The kind that happens when someone realizes something they didn't expect. He climbed back up slowly, looked at me differently now. Not questioning, not dismissing, understanding. It's not cold down there, he said. No. How? It doesn't change like up here. He glanced back at the opening, then at the valley, then at his own cabin in the distance. His woodpile already half gone. You knew this would happen, he said. I knew it could. He nodded. Because that was enough. Not certainty, but preparation. What do I need to do, he asked. That was the moment everything shifted. Not just for him, but for the entire valley. Because once one person understands, it spreads. Dig, I said. Under your shed? If you want it hidden. How deep? Until the ground stops changing. He frowned slightly. Stops changing. You'll feel it. That was the only way to explain it. Because it wasn't about measurement. It was about behavior. About knowing when the earth stopped reacting to the air. And the rest? He asked. Keep it small. Why? Because small spaces are easier to hold. He nodded again, then stood. Already thinking. Already planning. Because now, he wasn't trying to fight the cold anymore. He was working around it. That was the difference. By the next day, others came. Not all at once, but enough. Word travels fast when survival is involved. Faster than doubt. Faster than pride. They didn't ask many questions. Not at first. They looked, climbed down, felt it for themselves. And that was all it took. Because the truth of it was undeniable. This is warmer than my house, one man said. It holds, I replied. Another shook his head. We've been doing it wrong. No, I said. You've been doing what you knew. That mattered. Because this wasn't about being wrong. It was about learning something new. And using it in time. They started digging that same afternoon. Not carefully. Not perfectly. But urgently. Because the cold didn't wait. And neither could they. The valley changed quickly after that. Not in appearance. The snow still covered everything. The wind still moved across the open spaces. But beneath, under sheds, behind woodpiles, hidden from view, something new was being built. Spaces that held. Spaces that didn't lose. Spaces that turned survival into something sustainable. Within days, the fires above ground grew smaller. Less desperate. Because they weren't the only source of warmth anymore. And the woodpiles stopped shrinking so fast. That was the real measure. Not comfort, but duration. How long something lasted. Weeks passed. The cold stayed. Then slowly. Began to ease. Not fully. Not immediately. But enough to notice. The worst had passed. And the valley had made it through. Not because they had more. But because they had used what they had differently. Turner stood beside me one morning. The sky clearer now. The air lighter. You changed everything with a hole in the ground, he said. I shook my head. No. I just used what was already there. He looked down at the earth. At the surface that everyone had walked on for years without thinking. We never saw it, he said. No, I replied. Because you weren't looking for it. That was the truth. The ground had always been there. Holding. Staying steady. Ignoring the extremes above. And all it took was one decision. One day. To use it differently. I stepped back into the shed. Looked at the woodpile. Still stacked. Still mostly untouched. And beneath it, the space that had made it possible. Not visible. Not obvious. But real. And that was the part that mattered. Because sometimes, the thing that saves you isn't what you build in plain sight. It's what you hide. What you prepare. What you understand. Before anyone else does. And when the coldest week comes, that's when it finally makes sense. Not to you, but to everyone else. And by then, it's already done its job.